been on the news, heard a lot from what Congress did, etc. One of the specific things they came up with was this CARES Act, and it has expanded some financial support options to nonprofits. I'm going to talk off a slide that you should be able to see in front of you right now. There are really three pieces to this legislation. We're going to focus on the left-hand column. The right-hand column is there for information. It's really for larger organizations, 500 employees or above. So we're going to assume that those folks have some internal resources that can help them through that. The center column on this chart talks about the EIDL, which is an emergency loan provision that's been available for some time. Some things have changed in that, trying to speed it up, make the grant procedure a little bit smoother, but it's fundamentally the way it's been for some time. And it is a loan provision with basically a grant of up to $10,000. Program on the left, the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, is the new and different one that we think will most benefit nonprofits. It is an emergency loan program where a chunk of loan can be forgiven as long as it's used predominantly for payroll. It's designed for organizations with less than 500 employees, which obviously covers most businesses in this country and certainly the vast majority of nonprofits. As I said, it is designed to be a loan, part of which can be forgiven. The amount of the loan is to be calculated based on your payroll. So if you go back to 2019 payroll, you may apply for up to 2.5 times what your payroll costs were per month. So 2.5 months worth of payroll, up to a maximum of $10 million. The way you apply for this is through your local bank. Again, you've probably seen some things on the news. Bank of America got a lot of press early on. It's the first big bank that really was able to embrace this and handle the paperwork, etc. Many small banks are also processing these requests. Want to drop the slide down, Vicki?
Connie has the power. Connie, there we go.
So the eligibility for nonprofits, as I had said, is 500 employees or less. That includes part-time contractors, anyone that would be considered getting a significant portion of their compensation from the nonprofit. It also says that the organization needs to have been functioning as of February 15th, because this is not designed so that you can start up a new nonprofit and get it funded that way. It's designed for existing nonprofits. One of the big benefits of this program is it's trying to make it easier on the banks. It's not requiring a lot of due diligence and research into your credit and your background. It's basically asking you to fill in some forms and give a good faith certification based on your financials. Connie, next slide. It is designed, as I say, to cover predominantly payroll costs. It's designed to have you keep people employed, but it can also be used for mortgage, rent, utilities, those kind of things which are necessities to keep your organization running. 75% of the amount you get of the loan must be used for payroll, which, as I say, includes benefits. So it would include health insurance, retirement benefits, all those things that are considered part of your payroll. The way this has been set up, the original law talked about maximum of a 10-year loan and a maximum interest rate of 4%. You've probably seen different numbers if you've been paying attention to this either online or in the news. For a while, the SBA proposed 50 basis points as the rate. The bank squawked that they couldn't even cover their costs with that. So where things have settled at the moment, and it may change, is currently it's a 1% interest rate. It's a 2-year maturity on the loan, and there are no payments, principal or interest, for 6 months. So that's the way the loan is set up. For the majority of you, I would assume you're not so interested in the loan. You're mainly interested in getting that basically turned into a grant. And all the paperwork on how to do that is not out there yet, because the loan was only available as of last Friday. However, this is designed for keeping your employees on the payroll for 8 weeks from the time that you get the loan. And if you do that, there's a section in the Act that allows you to later apply for forgiveness for those 2 months worth of costs for payroll and also for your other utilities, rent, mortgage, those kind of things. Connie, last slide. For those who want more detailed information, obviously you'll hear more on this call, and we're open to answering any questions. However, at the bottom of this sheet here, under application and documentation, there are links. You can go to the SBA, the Small Business Administration website. I'd caution you to do sba.gov, or when you Google that, you'll get all kinds of other stuff with people volunteering to quote unquote help you. I would make sure you go to directly sba.gov, and there is a sample form on there of the kind of information you'll need when you go to your bank and apply. And there's also a lot more detailed information about the program, including the what they call their initial final rules, which is a 30-odd page document that details exactly how the program will work, if you're up to reading any of that. But this sheet that we've just been using really covers the highlights of that. So with that, that's the end of what I had to say. I'll let others take over from here.
Thanks, Brian. So next on the agenda is Annaliese.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, Connie. Can I get you to go actually to the first slide of the CARES Act? That's a great place for me to talk from. So we go back up. That's perfect to the top one. One more down where Brian started talking from would be great. So while we're doing that, so I am Annaliese Corbin with the PAST Foundation. Just for a bit of context, so we are a small nonprofit. We've been around for 20 years. We have a full-time staff of 12 and a lot of seasonal folks that work for us. We are in the education space. And we have a pretty sort of mixed or diverse set of clients and partners that are a lot of schools and school districts, as well as some state and federal education funding that we work through along with our corporate partners. So just to sort of set the stage of the type of organization that we are. And we've been having loads of fun, I say facetiously, navigating CARES. And so what I thought that I would share, or that Jerry had asked that I share with all of you today, is sort of the rationale and thinking about the way that we've approach this. So as a small nonprofit, we've actually been very fortunate through all of this in that the majority of our work this time of year in the winter and all the way through the spring, especially with our schools. So we've had set contracts and grants that were tied specifically for servicing in the K-12 space this time of year. And although the majority of that work we've been able to roll and shift. So we were fortunate that none of our existing work, our contracts or whatnot, were suspended. So that made it possible as we started to navigate what's happening right now, that I have not had to lay off or release any staff. And I recognize that's not the case for everybody. But as we started thinking about, as CARES was coming online, we really focused on tapping into two pieces of this. So as you heard Brian talking about, we specifically are utilizing the PPP program as Brian laid out in all the different ways that it works. I will tell you that it has been an ever moving target. And in fact, literally right before this call, we were going through the latest sets of forms. We've already filled out forms 3 times for our local bank. And the bank has asked us to fill out yet again because the forms are changing pretty frequently as some of the rules and trying to get the program online. We had actually worked very carefully with our banks and our financial partners early on to try to make sure that as we navigated through all of this, that we could be as meaningful and as transparent as possible with our financial institutions. And so we have a financial institution where we have a commercial mortgage for the building. For those of you that are video screen, the fake image behind me is actually the past innovation lab. So it's a very, very large building. So we have a traditional commercial mortgage on that. So you know, we were able to reach out to all of our lenders. We have a line of credit with another institution, and then we have a foundation PRI loan as well. So we are a small organization with a big giant debt tied to a massive facility that we endeavored on. So for us, we were utilizing these two components with some of those things in mind. So the PPP program, again, you know, my advice to you in that space is make sure that whichever local bank that you're working through, because again, this one is tied specifically to that local bank, has to be your shepherd. You know, one of the things that the bank told me today is that many of the banks are prioritizing applications based on their client relationships. So that's not a huge surprise, right? That many of these are going to come in, many of the banks are being flooded with applications, and that many of them are internally choosing to process applications or prioritize them based on relationships they have with existing clients and customers. So I guess keep that in mind as you think about it. The other piece of all of this that we've actually decided to make use of is the EIDL, but it's now available as emergency option for nonprofits. And so we were utilizing that for a couple of different pieces. I'm not so concerned about what happens to us right now or in the coming 8 weeks, if you will, because like I said right at the very beginning, our work and the way it's structured, we're okay at the moment. I'm actually more concerned about us in the late summer and through the fall, because right now is the time when we typically work with our clients and our partners, ideally our schools, to craft contracts for the coming academic year. We are on a calendar fiscal year, so that means right now I'm working on contracts that carry us from the start of the fall and through our next fiscal year. And so our concern is that nobody wants to talk about those contracts right now, right? They're so immersed in trying to figure out how to do virtual instruction in the state of Ohio that nobody wants to talk about what we're going to do for school next year. So it's that urgency piece for us. And so we have opted to apply for both the EIDL option as well as the PPP program. We applied for EIDL on March 25th. And we have been able to move our application into review, but we've not had anything come back from that. It's really, for those that want to go through that process, what I will tell you is it's not really set up for nonprofits. It is, they're allowing us to use it, but be really, really mindful and don't be surprised that when you go through the the paperwork and application process, there's a lot of questions that are not relevant to nonprofits, and it's clear they're retrofitting some of the paperwork, even in some of the new streamlined paperwork now. For nonprofits, really, you can get very flustered very quickly on it. And I don't, because I haven't talked to an SBA officer yet. I've been calling, we're not up in queue yet. So I can't tell you how they're going to resolve some of the paperwork components where we either couldn't answer, or I had to put zeros in, or I had to leave it blank and say NA, because this process wasn't really working specifically for us. And I know there's going to be questions later, and I hope that this information was useful for us. We are just trying to be able to balance out what we know we have right now, what's coming, and where and how we might be able to sort of stretch some of those pieces out.
Annaliese, this is Brian. You said you have not been able to talk to an officer at the bank yet?
Mm-hmm. At the bank we have, but we've not spoken to an officer at SBA for the EIDL. And I see the note from Christy about the note about both.
Right.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I specifically asked that question, and thank you very much, Christy, for posting that. Literally on that call I was just on right before, I point blank asked the question, can we in fact apply for both of these? And the information that the banks that we've been working with right now, their understanding is that we can, but again, yeah, and because we're applying for the EIDL, specifically there, if you read through the fine print, there's an opportunity for nonprofits to be able to utilize EIDL under the current scenario to offset or to refinance term debt at the lower CARES rates. So that's the piece that we applied for. We'll see what happens.
Thank you, Elyse.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the PPP is going to process much, much faster. There's no question. So back to Christy's point, it may ultimately lock us out, but we don't know. And so we were told to go ahead and do both, and we'll see what happens.
Okay, thank you. Are you finished?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Absolutely.
No,
Yeah.
that's okay. I just didn't want to interrupt, although
No, thank
interrupted.
you.
Thank you very much. Anne, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Ann Cook. I'm a VP of HR for a global manufacturing company based headquartered here out of Westchester area, and also support OneSource as a volunteer. So really happy to spend the afternoon with you and just walking through some of the challenges that I think we're facing as we try to stay connected, whether it's to our employee population, and in your case, probably to volunteers as well, as we're kind of going through these unprecedented times. So there's really, as you look at it from the CARES Act with the continuation of employment, for those of you who have and are eligible for the FFCRA benefits, the Families First Corona Response Act, and some of the other benefits that are out there, and also trying to manage your staff and possibly a remote work staff. There's a lot of different areas that you need to be considerate of. And I think one of the most important things, and one of the things that we really stepped back and took time at, is creating just a really robust communication agenda. And that agenda had all stakeholders into place. So kind of just a matrix component with it in order to determine really what the frequency was going to be, how we were going to communicate to our employee base, whether it's electronically, video messaging, some of the different tools that are out there today, and then using that to whether it was with government agencies, our own employees, families of our employees, our customer base, and so forth, just how we were going to orchestrate that on a day in, day out basis. With everything that was going on, that is going on in the world today, it was important for us at least to step back and make sure it was very structured. And I would encourage you to do the same, because that continuity and that regularity is very comforting from an employee standpoint. So, you know, obviously our workforce looks a lot different today than it did about 6 weeks ago, whether it's structured in such a manner that we've had to actually reduce some headcount, or whether or not, you know, you have a remote work team. So what we're going to talk through today a little bit is just, you know, based off of your diversity, what are some of the actions that you can take that are really be able to connect you and keep employee engaged? Because even if you are in the process or have looked at furloughing employees, you want them to return. It's important. And the same thing from a volunteer standpoint. So how do you keep the connection? So really, you know, talk a little bit about this in-depth communication plan. And I think, you know, more than happy to share it with Vicki and team, kind of how do you go about structuring that and being able to communicate. You know, defining regular rhythms of communication, whether it's at an organizational level or encouraging at department levels, whether it's business updates or whether or not it's just check-in points, are all pieces that need to be considered as you're walking through this. One of the things that I would encourage you to do is to step back and think about, you know, your normal schedules. What was your normal in the workplace type of actions that happened, and just try to make them virtual as possible. There are numerous tools out there, you know, Zoom obviously is one, but there's a ton of different collaboration tools that right now are being offered for free that I encourage you to stay in touch with and to be able to utilize. And I'll walk you through a couple of them, or at least talk through them, and then we can also post them. But regularly scheduled, you know, start of the morning calls or stand-up meetings, check-in points are important, project management reviews, anything from maintaining a schedule and a report out schedule are all things that you need to be thinking about, because that normal course of action, once again, people find comfort in it, and it's also going to move your business forward as you're thinking about stepping out of, you know, these unprecedented times and back to a little bit more of a standard practice. On the personal side, you're seeing a lot coming around with virtual coffee breaks, virtual lunch breaks, being able to, you know, the happy hours and so forth. Those are all important to people to keep the connection. Any kind of systems that hold people accountable, even on the personal side, whether it's related to health or stretching, getting up, you know, and away from your desk. We've put out a lot of different flyers and best practices about how you should start your day and your routine, substituting your commute time with exercise routines, being able to do, you know, encourage any type of competition and potentially reward with it as it relates to exercise or anything else, cooking challenges, favorite pet challenges, so forth, to tie in the connection. From tools, you know, I think the best resources that I actually saw was a Forbes list of kind of tools that are being offered to companies and to nonprofits to help stay connected. One of the things, there's just a couple that I'd like to highlight that I thought were kind of creative and interesting. One is this called Vidyard. They can create video messages at no cost through June 30th. You can share those video messages, whether it's like, once again, and whether it's with your employees, with your volunteers, whether it's the community that you support as a whole. Cisco's offering video conferencing for free. There's a company called Boardable that's offering free 90-day access for nonprofits to hold online board meetings. And Avaya has free collaboration software through August 31st. And the last one is a company called WorkHuman, which actually is providing free access to their recognition, connection, and celebrations tool set, and that's available to you for 1 year. So all of these different aspects are all coming into play as you think about how do you keep your employees engaged. The last thing that I just want to highlight is you also have access to a lot of online training, whether it's free trials through LinkedIn, whether it is Franklin Covey's resources and tool sets related to leadership skills. There's podcasts, there's online courses, and YouTube, if you're thinking about skill sets, you know, whether it's training on Excel or Microsoft Office products, whether it's also, there's targeted trainings that are specific for nonprofits inside. Those are all things that are available to you. And what I would encourage, and what we've even done, is we've actually asked managers to set up these online training programs. So as your employees, and if you're thinking about what skill sets and what gaps you have as an organization, this is a perfect time for those people who are working remote or even on that you can provide them with these tools to show that you're still invested in them from a growth standpoint. So be more than happy to share all those tools with you. I will make sure we get everything over to Vicki so we can distribute them accordingly. In addition, the last thing I just want to highlight is being in tune from a mental health standpoint. There are, as obviously high anxiety, high stress levels, both for, personally from an individual standpoint, but then throughout your organization. So if you think about publicizing as part of your normal communication, the tools that are available, whether it's through the state, whether it's through your private health insurance plans, or whether they are through, if you have any type of EAP programs that you are a part of, those are all available resources. Encourage you to publish them so that people know they have access to them. It's just an easy way to keep it up in front and in people's minds. So if they do need to utilize them, they have the opportunity to do so. So that was everything that I wanted to cover. I'm more than happy to answer any questions, but we'll make sure we get everybody the resource list that I kind of just walked through, but highlighted just a few, but we'll make sure we get everybody the full list.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ann. And we will ask questions at the end, if that's okay. We'll hold questions. So next up is Erin.
Hi, everyone. Thanks to OneSource for having me here today. At ProBono Partnership, we partner closely with OneSource on a lot of things. We're similarly an umbrella organization, and we like to refer clients to all of them who aren't ready for lawyers, and then they refer people to us when people are ready for lawyers. So, and looking at the names, there's a lot of familiar names, a few clients and a few new ones. So for anyone that's not familiar with ProBono Partnership of Ohio, we are the third pro bono partnership nationally, and we've been here for just over 5 years. Our mission is to strengthen our community's nonprofits by providing free business legal services. So we've been able to do this. Vicki, if you could switch slides. We have engaged over 600 local attorneys to provide subject matter expertise to our nonprofit clients on a wide range of different types of legal matters. Next slide, please. So this is typically the types of legal projects we handle. The goal is to make sure that all of our nonprofit clients are functioning with the absolute strongest foundation possible. It is critical to our community that all of these wonderful agencies are operating as strongly as they can and that they're here for the long term. This has become more clear now than ever before. It's been really a whirlwind of 3 weeks, and the types of problems and concerns that our clients have become much more immediate. You know, board responsibilities and bylaws, all of a sudden we're doing a lot of advice on corporate governance during a pandemic. How does our board meet? What do the rules and regulations say if our bylaws are silent on it? Applying for the PPP loans, you know, our banker is requiring board minutes or some resolution authorizing me to apply for the loan on behalf of Pro Bono Partnership. And in Ohio, that's only legal if you don't have a prior authorization, if you have unanimous consent. So, you know, counseling our clients on what that means and what steps they need to take in place to make sure that their organizations are protected and they're protected. We've done a lot of contracts work recently. Force majeure is a word I haven't used since law school, but that's, you know, what happens in contracts if they, you can no longer perform on them. And, you know, they're kind of a get out of it clause. So we've been helping advise clients who are trying to enforce contracts and also advising clients who are trying to get out of contracts they can no longer fulfill based on what's going on. Our number one thing we've been working with clients on so far to date is employment matters. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act is not clear, to say the least. You know, for these, just like the PPP and the CARES Act, you know, that came out last Friday or 2 Fridays ago, and the banks were supposed to be ready last Friday. And, you know, they're still right now trying to figure out what's going on. I hung up with my banker as I was dialing in here for the sound check, and he's, you know, sending me the newest application and saying, when it says who's the owner, you, Aaron, put down you're the 100% owner, because that's just what we're doing for nonprofits. Whereas clearly I'm not the owner of our organization. So spending a lot of time advising our clients on, you know, when leave's available, funding, you know, what's the difference between furloughing and laying off, and what's the interplay between if I already laid people off, but I want to apply for the PPP, you know, how does that all interplay? And I am a subject matter expert on none of it. Thankfully, I know just enough to be dangerous and say that's an issue. Let us find you an attorney with that subject matter expertise. Vicki, if you could go to the last slide. We have really jumped internally. We're a really small organization. Oh, it's not there. We've tried to do a lot to be responsive to our clients. You know, typically we have a longer process for how we accept projects and place them, but we've established this employment helpline for all of our clients, you know, just those one-off questions that can be handled in 30 minutes or less. We have a whole core of volunteer attorneys who are willing to take those 30-minute calls with our clients. We've put on several webinars, one on the CARES Act, one on the, I always say it wrong, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. It does not roll off your tongue. We also are publishing a lot of legal alerts and updates. You know, all of us, a lot of us as small nonprofits, you know, you hear about these big laws, and, you know, our first response is to be like, well, it doesn't apply to us. We're just, you know, we're a small nonprofit. And a lot of laws that don't typically apply to us absolutely apply to us. We've been answering a lot of questions on the Families First, the FRCA. You know, typically the provisions of the FMLA laws don't apply to my organization because we're so small. But now a lot of these new laws do apply to us, we think, you know, unless we can prove hardship. But there were no regulations explaining what the laws were. So the Department of Labor just came out with a bunch of new explanations yesterday. We're sending out a webinar, a legal alert on that tomorrow. You know, when we did our webinar, our speaker had to change all of her slides the morning of the webinar because there was some more clarification. And the Q&As that came out of the webinar, we sent to everyone because a lot of the law had changed, or things that the Department of Labor hadn't been specific on. Suddenly they gave specific guidance, and they've just given more specific guidance. So the laws are chaotic, and how we're trying to, you know, square pegs fitting into round holes, as my banker said. He goes, but we really want you to fit inside. We're just going to shave you a little bit on the side to make sure you fit inside our round hole. A lot of it's not even legal. You know, it's been chaotic, and a lot of the guidance that we're receiving is only making things more muddied. So, you know, if you, depending on who you listen to, you know, what expert who's speaking on what, the answer is usually, it depends. And this is how it stands right now, this very second. So please lean on Pro Bono Partnership if you have legal questions. If you're not a client, we're really trying to fast track our application process. It takes about 20 minutes to fill out the application. So I'm happy to answer any questions on that, but please let us be a resource to you all during this time.
Great, thank you, Erin. Is Connie still online?
Yes.
So what's the best way for us to field questions?
I am going to unmute everybody.
Okay.
And we'll see how that goes. And since everybody is unmuted, they have the ability to ask questions. Robin is on. Robin has a question. I'm not hearing good sound.
No.
We're just going to unmute everybody. I think maybe the best thing to do while I'm unmuting everybody is if anyone has a question, to raise it in the chat, and then we can answer. I'm hearing somebody, but not well.
I think it may be a electronic device in the background.
Could be.
Okay, any questions, anyone?
This is Joy. I have a quick question. It's really kind of on the backside. Do you know, as this flips from loan to grant status, whether or not there are sometimes when that period of salaries for employees will be high, and even though they're still employed, if they're seasonal or whatever, their salaries will drop. Is there going to be some effort to sort of match that up at the end when it converts from loan to grant, do you think?
It's my understanding that the way what they call the preliminary final rules, which seems like an oxymoron, but if you read those, it talks about using an average of the past 12 months. Obviously, that won't cover you for your peak, but it should avoid hitting the trough. Again, I think that's part of what's going to get worked out here because, as you've heard from several people, they're still processing loans. They haven't yet turned their minds to how do I turn this into a grant. But the rules as of right now talk about a 12-month average.
Thanks.
Also, I'll add that in terms of spending the money and showing that you spend it, that it's supposed to be in the 8 weeks after you get the grant, and that 75% of it has to be spent on payroll, and then the other 25% could be spent on rent and utilities. So, and payroll includes benefits. So, and that everyone, and that the calculation will also, and again, everything changes daily, it seems, but that the calculation would change if you didn't retain all of the employees that you had on, and that's another question, was it, I've heard February 15th, what the staff you had on board on February 15th, so that if you had 20 staff on February 2015 or February 15th, and then you only had 10 staff on June 30th, that your grant forgiveness would be reduced by a third because you didn't bring all of your people back. Now, again, this is all based on information that was in another session I was in last week, so it seems like things change daily.
Thanks.
I just on Elyse, and I will add, just because we're filling out paperwork, it would seem like daily right now because it changes all the time. And Brian might actually know the answer to this question, but when you're filling out the PPP form online and you're actually trying to predict things like they're asking questions about, what your utilities will cost and, these various things that you might be allowed to convert to grant. One of the line items they're asking about is something called interest on debt incurred before February 15th. 2020, and there seems to be a lot of confusion about what that is. My recommendation is to work specifically with the local lender or the bank that's going to be processing this, but that's a big giant question, but it does play into the total numbers that hit your calculation. And the initial calculation in the PPP is based on that average payroll that Brian was referencing, and that 2.5 multiplier. And that may or may not actually translate to the form later, the figures you have to add in, but it's really the figure on the front, the very first piece you put in. As our bank explained to us, that's the figure they're actually going to run with, and they have to align. So figuring out how to make them align may be a little more difficult than you think because of that particular component.
Yeah, I mean, my thought here is, if in doubt, use the larger numbers. And I don't mean that in any nefarious way, but ask for the most you can. Hopefully it will be approved. If it is not, then you tried. And if it is approved, but it doesn't qualify for forgiveness forgiveness lended the money for 6 months. As I'm not trying to scam anybody by saying that. I think there is confusion, and part of the issue here is, one, that the SBA has not finalized the data they want, but two, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of banks applying, and they're all using their own filter of what they think they need to provide to the SBA. So if you go to multiple banks, you may well get multiple answers. So apply for whatever your bank will accept and go forward from there.
I have a question. Would 1099 employees count as employees? We're a small rescue and all our employees are 1099.
Yes.
This is Erin. I'm not, is that still true? I know originally 1099 employees were going to be allowed for organizations to include in their PPP application, but I think the most recent guidance states that independent contractors are to apply on their own for PPP.
You may have newer information than I.
So double check. Again, I know just enough to be dangerous.
That's true.
This is Joy with another quick question. Do you recommend applying to multiple banks, or should you just pick the one that you have the closest relationship with?
From everything I know, I would take the one you have the best relationship with. As I think some of the other presenters mentioned, banks are having to prioritize who they talk to. And if you have a relationship with them already, you're probably going to move closer to the front of the line, as opposed to coming in, you know, way at the end. If for some reason your bank is not dealing with you, you may need to go elsewhere, but I think where you've got the existing relationship is your best shot.
Other questions? I want to be with Liz sitting outside there.
I had to move my office outside. It's just too nice.
Good call. Any other questions? I don't want to rush, but I don't want to hold up people if they have all the information they need. But Connie, can we see that last slide shows the resources that are available?
Yes, just 1 second. And the other is, remember that Anne is going to provide you with resources that you can post. So just a second while I pull up. Oh my goodness. You get to see everything here, and it's not pulling up right now. Here we go. Let's see if we can get that pulled up. Vicki, are you going to send a copy of this PowerPoint to everybody?
I certainly can.
Okay, I'm trying to get back to, here we go, right here. Okay. And from there you go.
There we went.
Yep. What can I say?
But I will include that last slide, of course, in the PowerPoint that we pass on to all of you. But it just has some contact numbers. So I would encourage you to just, excuse me.
I'm not quite sure what happened, folks, but even though it's supposed to be projecting, it's not.
So I would encourage you just to use those numbers and contact any of us if we can answer any questions for you after this call. Okay?
Super.
Really appreciate you all coming today. It was so nice to see so many faces. And those of you who didn't post your pictures, don't be so shy next time. We want to see your faces.
Well, I have lots of traffic coming back and forth. We have some, lots of members of my family, so I always have to block it because I don't know what's going on.
You don't know what state they're going to be in, right? Thank you all so much. And we will be in touch with some additional information.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.